Welcome to the castle, everybody. This is Nightsaber Z42, and this is Character Vault, where we go through different systems and we go through the whole character creation process. And today, I'm actually really excited about this one. We're taking a look at the Power Rangers role-playing game by Renegade Game Studios. And man, I got this book a couple weeks ago, and I am super stoked to get excited. So let's go ahead and open this book up and see just all the different steps for creating a character. Let's get into it. So our journey begins here on chapter 2, which is the character creation chapter, and it just gives you a basic overview of what to expect in the 6 steps that it takes to creating your own character. So first step is that we're going to come up with some sort of a character concept. It's basically like just a rough draft of your character. You can definitely skip it if you already feel like you know what you want your character to be. Step 2 is choosing your origin. Step 3 will be choosing a role, which is your color for your ranger. Step 4 will be choosing an influence. Step 5, we're going to allocate our essence points, which are pretty much your ability scores. And step 6 is when we'll actually kind of finalize some of our skills. After that, of course, we'll describe our character and then we'll actually get through our equipment. But the 2 latter steps are actually included in some of the previous steps as well. So that's really all there is to say about that. So let's take a moment to take a look at the character sheet. Got 2 pages here, and it looks like there's a lot of stuff, but it actually makes a lot of sense. So you actually have your 4 essence scores right here in 4 different columns: strength, speed, smarts, and social. I actually really do like how they handle this, because under each column you have your different skills that are actually for those essences. It's actually really weird for me to say essences, so I might be switching back and forth between abilities and essences, but they're pretty much the same thing if you're coming from Dungeons and Dragons terms. You also have your attacks on the first page. Now, the really cool thing about this whole system, the Essence 20 system, I believe is what they call it, is that as you get more skills, or actually as you level up your skills, you're actually rolling accompanying dice other than d20. So you're always going to be rolling a d20, but let's say that I have athletics at d2. That means I'm going to also be flipping a coin and adding that number to my roll, and so on and so forth until I get to d12. So I'll have a d20 plus a d12, roll both of those, and that becomes my roll for that particular skill check. It's very interesting. I have not seen anything like that except for Savage Worlds, but it doesn't quite do it like this. On the next page, we have things like our weapons and armor, any powers and perks that we have, as well as our Zord stats, which is what we're going to need because, when Repulsa actually makes those monsters huge, we're of course going to be summoning our Zord and creating them into one and then having a super mega battle, which is really cool. So that's actually the character sheet. So let's actually go in and talk about the character concept. So really, before we do anything, let's take a moment to just kind of sit down and think about what we want our character to be. Now, of course, before recording this video, I've already thought about that. I've already determined that we are going to have maybe like an oddball type character who's not socially popular by any means. He might have come out of the closet a little bit recently, or maybe people suspect that, and we're actually going to make him a Pink Ranger. Now, in the history of Power Rangers, I have actually only ever known one Pink Ranger, and that was in the comics, and that was the 1969 Power Rangers that actually went to the moon and did a whole bunch of stuff. I think that was in the Shattered Grid arc for that comic. I could be mistaken though. And so I kind of actually want to emulate that because the Pink Rangers actually got some really cool stuff going on in terms of abilities. And so I kind of want to bring that to the table here as well. Also, we're going to make him Latino. So let's move on to step 2. We're going to actually pick out our origin. chapter 3 is where we're going to be for determining our origin. And your origin is actually what defines a person before they were actually a ranger. That's about as best as I can put it. And there's actually 10 different origins to choose from. So we have things like athletic, you're an athlete, you do all of that stuff, and each origin is going to give you like starting health, your essence score increase options, some skills for each of your different essences, and languages, because your origin is actually going to determine what or how many languages you speak. And then, of course, there's like some sort of a benefit or ability that is associated with that origin. So for athletic, our starting health would be 2, since we're in great physical shape. Our increase of an essence score is going to be either strength or speed by +1. And we get some bonus skills. So under strength, we get athletics, brawn, might. Speed based is acrobatics, finesse, and initiative. And our ground movement is going to be 40 feet. And it does change between different origins. Languages, we haven't had much time to study, but we know your native language and 1 additional language for each 3 points of social you possess. And that's actually really interesting how they kind of term that. So like, if your essence score for social is higher, you know more language. And I think that's a really interesting way of actually putting that. Our origin benefit is always training. So you are used to always work out in physical training in your spare time. When making a strength or speed-based skill check in a skill you do not possess levels in, you still roll a d2 skill die and do not suffer a snag for being untrained. So that's actually really interesting and cool. I really do like that your origins kind of really define your overall, like, what you're good at. So we have athletic, we have brainy, we have comedic, curious, cynical, kind, oddball, popular, rebellious, tragic, and that's it, all 10. So on our character sheet, let's take a look. Our origin would actually go right up here, and I'm actually thinking of choosing oddball. You aren't like anyone else. Sometimes you say things and don't make any sense to anyone but you and your close friends, and sometimes not even them. You don't dress like the popular people, you don't listen to the top 40 music stations, and when your mind wanders, it really wanders. Some people call you eccentric, perhaps unique, but one thing is for certain, you aren't like anyone else. So let's write origin on our character sheet at the very top, right underneath the name, which we'll come up with at the very end. So we got oddball. Our starting health. Being different sometimes means sticking up for yourself, and you begin with 2 health. So let's take a look. Our health is right here, so we're going to write 2. Our essence score increase option. You may increase any essence score by +1, which is actually really good. That means we actually get to choose. And we are actually going to not deal with that right now, mainly because we don't know what our essence scores are. So I'm actually going to write it on the side here, +1 to any essence. And we'll add that in once we determine what our essence scores are. We get bonus skill level, so that means we actually get a D2 in the following skills. We have intimidation and might for strength. Very interesting. I never really thought that, being an oddball meant that you were intimidating, but all right. For smarts, we have alertness, culture, and survival. For speed, we have infiltration. For social, we have animal handling, deception, performance, and streetwise. All right, so a nice balance of skills right there. Our ground movement is going to be 30 feet, so not quite as much as athletic. And I believe the average ground movement for all the different origins is about 30 feet. I think 1 or 2 might have 25 feet, and athletics has 40 feet because, they're super athletic. Languages. While you probably know a few made-up languages or those from your favorite television series, real languages haven't been big on your radar. You are fluent in your native language and 1 additional language for each 3 points of smarts you possess, which we don't quite know yet. And this actually brings up a rather big criticism of this whole process. Essence scores is one of the last things you actually do, yet one of the very first things you do actually has you refer to your essence scores. So I might actually jumble up the way that I create the character. I might want to do essence first because that seems to be a very integral part of the whole character creation process, and then go from there. That's probably what I would do in the future. So for languages, of course, English is going to be one, but I'm actually going to give him one other and kind of just leave it at that, mainly because in terms of language, if you have a language, like a native language that is not, the common language, in this case English, you can actually get a language for free. And so our language of choice is actually going to be English and Spanish, since we come from a Spanish home. So there we go. Awesome for that. We get the origin benefit, nobody like me. So you are truly unique, and this is shown by you being able to choose any perk you have a prerequisite for. So that will actually come in much later as we start leveling up. But for now, we'll go ahead and add it. There we go. We have our origins all determined out. And there really isn't anything else to do. You only get one origin, I believe. So we're actually going to pick a role. The energy color of a Power Ranger is what determines their role on the team. And so you actually have 6 starting roles to start with. So you have the Black Ranger, a skilled warrior whose charm and personality helps form the bonds between their team. You have the Blue Ranger, a clever technology expert with the strongest understanding of the Morphin Grid. The Green Ranger, capable of working with a team, but excels at surviving against all odds. The Pink Ranger, an eagle-eyed sharpshooter, always aware of their surroundings. Red, a strong fighting spirit that leads from the front of any conflict. And Yellow Ranger, fast and nimble, this warrior is good at exploiting an enemy's weakness. And as you can see, there are some essence adjustments and something called a power capacity growth, which we'll learn about a little bit later. So as I said at the very beginning, we're actually going to be the Pink Ranger. So let's add that under role. And let's take a look at the actual Pink Ranger and see all the things that we get. So this is very, very, very similar of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition in many, many ways. And one of those ways is how they present classes, or in this case, the Ranger Spectrum. You got a nice big box here that tells you what you get for every level. And sometimes they get an ability that you can use multiple times per day or whatever. In this case, we get something called volley because we're a sharpshooter. So really all we need to do is write down our perks on our character sheet. We'll read our spectrum features. And that's pretty much it, since we're going to be a level 1 character. We don't have to worry about Zords or anything like that, but we do get an ability called volley. So let's start at the spectrum role features. What do we get? As a Pink Ranger, we gain the following. Personal power regeneration is 4 per day. Our personal power capacity is +2 per every 4 levels. And so I think what we'll do is we'll add maybe just a +2 to personal power. That way we know that we have that. Our training in armor is light, which unfortunately is not on the character sheet in any training at all. So we'll have to add this ourselves. Probably going to add that right here under notes. Our starting skill ranks, we get +1 finesse, +1 targeting, +1 persuasion. And so if we already have one of those skills, we just bump that up to a D4 rank. So finesse, we actually do not have. Targeting, we do not have, which is what we're going to need in order to actually shoot things. That's actually your ranged combat skill. And +1 persuasion. So we actually had none of those skills. Now we have at least some training, and then we get to roll a D2 in addition to our D20 to determine our skill. So we get 4 pieces of equipment. We get a wrist communicator, our power morpher, a blade blaster, and some sort of a ranged power weapon. And Let's see, we have some perks. We have It's Morphin Time, which really, all that really says is that we're able to summon the Morphin Grid and turn into a Power Ranger. So while morphed, we also gain the following traits and features. Our toughness bonus is determined by our armor training, so we're actually going to get a +1 to toughness. All of your jump distances maximums are tripled. As a free action, you can summon any single power-based weapon to your hands. And when reduced to 0 health, you may choose to avoid defeat by automatically returning to your natural form unconscious and at 1 health. So those are the things that we get. All we're going to do is write it down on our under perks and the page number so that we know specifically what we'll have if we will need to refer to it. And we also get a perk called Volley. So at first level, your Pink Ranger skills with a ranged power weapon are such that you can use your Morphin Grid power to launch a volley of attacks instead of a single shot. By spending 1 personal power, you may make a special volley attack action as long as you do not move. This volley attack action allows you to make a number of ranged attacks against valid targets equal to the volley shots number listed on the table above. It's actually on the previous page. Range, cover, and other modifiers apply to these targets individually. So we'll add volley, and there we go. So volley, under level 1, we have volley shots 2. So we can use volley 2 times, and it doesn't go up until 5th level. Again, at 9th level, 13th level, 17th level, and that's it. So that's really all we have, except for we get a speed increase. So let's actually add that. +2 to speed, and +1 to social. There we go. It's coming together a little bit. Something that we'll need to make sure that we do is remember that we have a +1 to any essence and all of that speed and social bonuses that we have, especially since our essence scores will be coming up within the next 2 steps. So that's all there is for your role on the team. You don't really determine your Zord at this point. You actually don't get a Zord until 3rd level. So I actually do agree with that, because usually on the television show, it's usually the Rangers are going out for a couple episodes, beating up things on foot, and then something happens that makes the monster grow, and now they have to actually summon their Zord for the first time, and they make a whole big deal out of it. So that totally makes sense. Now, one thing I will point out is that you have the whole spectrum of colors here, or at least the ones that are in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, but you also have an advanced Ranger spectrum. In this case, it's the White Ranger. So really cool, and it's actually in this part right here where they specifically mention that more advanced Rangers options will be coming up in future releases, which I am down with. That it is going to be so cool because, you know, the advanced Rangers, it's pretty much different in all this TV series. Like the White Ranger was obviously the first one, but then you would have different ones as well. Like the Gold Ranger was one, the Magnum Ranger was another one. So it's always different. And I would be so excited to get like source books for like the different series, like Galaxy and In Space. That would be so cool. Anyways, enough of that. Let us choose our influences. Influences kind of serve as a background that your character has when they were growing up. Now there are 10 influences to choose from, and you can actually only pick up to 3 during character creation. And the first one is going to be free. That means you get all of the benefits of that influence with none of the negative side effects of it. And each one after the first one, you get all the benefits and all of the negative side effects, and I'll kind of show you what that means as we go through the influences. So your 10 influences are artisan. These will be like your musicians or your poem makers, dancing, anything that is an art, that would kind of go under artisan. Caretaker, community helper, small town roots, a martial artist, because of course we need somebody to actually be into that. A nomad, not from around here, so like your extraterrestrials who are down to earth, maybe disguised as human or maybe not. And student, and then survivor, just one more, and then teacher, which I think was really interesting that they put that here, because this definitely might seem like a game for teenagers, since they're teenagers with attitude in the whole Power Rangers spectrum. But teacher is obviously not just something that's specifically for teenagers. Like, you can be like maybe like a student teacher or a teacher's pet, but this specifically says, hey, grown-ups can be a Power Ranger too. I mean, obviously Tommy Oliver in Dino Thunder was a Power Ranger, and he was also a teacher, so I actually really do enjoy the fact that they're thinking outside, more that this is just a game for teenagers. And they specifically mention adults being Power Rangers here and there all throughout the book. So actually, let's take a look at one of these influences first. So each influence gives you some sort of a perk. It gives you something called a hang up, which is the negative effect that is associated with that specific influence, and some suggested characteristics, which you could roll a d8 on if you really want to, and then an artisan bond. I'm actually really quite amazed that there's absolutely no dice rolling involved in this character creation process. The only time where you might want to roll dice is actually when you're picking your influences, and only for like random tables like this. So with the artisan, we would gain edge when your art comes into play. That means you're going to roll 2d20, take the higher result, such as when performing, sharing techniques, or applying your art to a mission. You are passionate about your art style and gain an edge on social and smart skill tests where your art style applies. Okay, so we would actually get the influence perk and the characteristic if this was going to be our first one. If this was like our second or third one, we would also get the hang up. You sometimes get absorbed by your work and miss what's going on around you. You suffer a snag on smarts and social skills checks unrelated to your art while you are actively involved with your art. Snag, by the way, is rolling 2d20 and taking the lower result. So basically just a vanish. If you are a solo artist, you hate having to share the spotlight with other artists, and you suffer a snag on social skill checks when around them. If you are a collaborative artist, your desire to talk about future art project causes you to lose focus on the task at hand. And of course, our different styles that we can choose from are like acting and modeling, dancing, drawing, painting, music, photography, writing books, poetry, sculpting, and then cooking. So it's nice options. Not every influence obviously will have that, but it's nice to have that here. And then of course we have an artisan bond, which is kind of like I guess I would say influences in Dungeons and Dragons, just those little one sentence blurbs that kind of give you characters some characteristics. So like, I am too competitive with my artistic pursuit, or I'm an incurable gossip and love to know what's going on in any group I'm in. So things like that. So we are actually going to start with survivor. So our character was in some sort of accident in the past, and that kind of really shaped who that person was. Somebody might have died from that accident, maybe someone they really cared about. That's something that we'll kind of determine a little bit later. So for now, under influences, we'll add survivor. And our hang up, it's just actually kind of weird that it's its own box because I'm not writing this whole thing. Well, actually, let's start with this. Our influence perk. After your hardship, you have honed your survival instincts and are able to use sheer willpower to overcome stressful situations. When faced with an emergency situation or instinctual choice, gain an edge on a survival or other related check to know how to best navigate the situation. Additionally, at any point where your smarts would be lowered to 0, roll a willpower check of 10 or above to keep it at 1. So, pretty nice that that's there. Our hang-up, however, the hardships of your life have been traumatic and have left lasting effects in your consciousness. This may cause you to stumble over your words or freeze like a deer in headlights. While in the presence of the reminder of your survival experience, you are unable to focus on anything else and suffer on a snag on all alertness checks. Now, the cool thing about having this as our first influence is that we don't really get the hang-up. we can choose a characteristics. You have a calm sense of composure when quick decisions need to be made. The idea of danger or even death does not sway you or your actions. Instead, you make methodical choices, compartmentalizing your fears or memories and going with your instincts for survival. We're just going to write survivor on our influence side and write the page number. And we're actually going to pick a survivor bond. Now, you could roll a d12 to find the results randomly, but there's actually one that fits into the backstory that I have for this character. So under background bonds, we're going to write, I may have survived my hardship, but someone I love deeply did not. So this could be somebody like a parent, or maybe a sibling, maybe boyfriend. Don't quite know. We'll determine that later. So that's our first influence, and there is actually another influence that we're going to take while we're here, just so we could also get a hang up. We're actually going to be an artisan. So under our influence, we'll write artisan down. So I've already read everything for artisan, so I'm actually just going to kind of write it down here. Something that I will kind of mention as I write is that we're actually going to be taking poetry as our style. So we'll go ahead and write poetry there. We're a deep, dark dude. And our artisan bond, well, we actually do get the hang up. So we'll actually refer to the page number here. Our bond, actually two really good ones. I'm going to either take 6, which I have never felt my art was good enough, or we could take the last one. My muse strikes at the worst times, in the middle of the night, during missions, or worse. Actually, you know what? That last one seems kind of fun. My muse strikes at the worst times, in the middle of the night, during missions, and worse. So we'll add that to our background bond. There we go. So that is everything that we get with our influence. We could opt in to take one more, but I really don't see there to be a need. It really doesn't fit with the backstory of my character, other than he's a survivor, and he probably took up something like poetry to fill in the void there. You know, having somebody die, he's inspired with those dark, deep, dark thoughts, brooding Batman thoughts, and, you know, he writes poetry about it and stuff like that. So now that we have our influence, we finally get to determine our essence score and skills. As I mentioned before, your essence scores are pretty much like your ability scores, and there are 4 of them. We have strength, speed, smarts, and social. So the 4 S's make up your attributes or abilities or whatever you want to call them, essences. So we have all of our skills under each essence, which I really do like. I'll mention it again because I really do like it. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to determine what our essence scores are. Okay. Now, we have 12 points to allocate to amongst our 4 essences. Now, there is actually a standard chart. It's 4, 3, 3, and 2 would probably be the easiest way to do it. And that's actually what I'm going to choose here. Now, we do get +1 to any essence, +2 to speed, and +1 to social. So we do need to remember that. So I'm actually going to start with speed, because speed is actually going to be our main stat. I'm actually going to make that into a 6. I was going to put the 4 there, but we're going to make that into a 6. Our social is, I believe our social and our smarts will be at 3. So smarts will be 3. Social will be 4 because of that +1 to social. And now our strength is going to be 2. But I think I'm going to bump that up to a 3 just to kind of round things out a little bit. There we go. So that +1 to any essence score is going to apply to strength. Nice. That's really all there is for your essence score. Now, we've already determined our skills, and we'll talk about that here in just a second, just to make sure that we're on the right page. But one thing that I will add, I'm actually going to add the original scores to the side, because we'll need that for when we determine or when we rank up our skills. Now that we have that out of the way, we do need to establish what our defenses are. So each essence has its own defense. So for strength, it's toughness. For speed, it's evasion. For smarts, it's willpower. And for social, it's cleverness. And the actual calculation or the formula for that is 10 plus your essence score plus any perk modifiers plus your armor equals what it is when you're morphed. For everything else, it's basically 10 plus your essence plus whatever perks you have. So in this case, it would be 10 plus our essence score, which is actually 3. We don't have any perks that have bumped that up, so that will become 13. Our toughness is 13. So whenever something is targeting our toughness, they will need to be a 13 in order to succeed at it. Likewise, our evasion is going to be a 10 plus our essence score, which is 6, so that becomes 16. Smarts is going to be 13. And for social, that will be 14. So not bad, I must say. I mean, we are the heroes, so I wouldn't expect anything less. By the way, this chapter does detail what your skills are under each essence. So for strength, of course, we have athletics, which are things like, physical activities like climbing, jogging, sports activities, swimming, throwing. I really do like how they have those samples there, because some of them might seem like they're the same thing, but they totally aren't. Brawn, which is things like dragging, lifting, and stamina, which honestly I would have just lumped in with athletics. It also determines your carrying weight if you are into that. You have something called conditioning, which is basically allocated to your HP, and then intimidation, so distract, frighten, and taunt. Might, which is what you would use for blunt weapons, grappling, martial arts, power weapons, pushing, shoving. Then we have our speed skills, acrobatics, things like balance, flying, gymnastics, maneuverability, driving, which is fun. That's anything that requires driving is going to be under that. There's a really long list here. Finesse, which would be things like escape artists, certain martial arts, power weapon, sharp weaponry, steady action, and throwing. And then we have infiltration, things like burglary, sleight of hand, shadowing, stealth, initiative. That's pretty much your initiative, for when you're in combat. Targeting, things like archery, ballistic, energy, power weapons, specific weapons, and throwing, trajectory, vehicle, sure. Smart-based skills are things like alertness, so insight, investigation, and perception. Culture would be things like grid lore, history, languages, psychology, specific culture, knowledge of a specific culture. Science, we'd have medicine, specific subject. Survival, we'd have things like cartography, foraging, hunting, specific environments, and weather prediction. Technology would be things like computer, grid tech, engineering, some sort of specific technology. And then we'd have our social-based skills, things like animal handling, deception, performance in one of the different arts, like visual, literary, performing, culinary arts, persuasion, diplomacy, embellishments, flattery, romance, and truth telling, because obviously you would need a role when telling the truth. Streetwise, have things like black market, because that could totally be a thing for teenagers. Crime, gossip, transportation, and that's pretty much it. So let's talk about our skills for a moment. There are a few different ways of leveling up your skill. When you gain a level in a new skill, you simply bump up the die. So if I have intimidation, which is D2, and I level that up, it now becomes a D4. That's pretty easy. We can gain a new skill. So that means I could take something like athletics, and now instead of just rolling a D20, I would roll a D20 plus a D2. Okay, that's simple enough. We could learn a new specialization. So all those different skills that I read underneath the core skills, like let's take persuasion, for example. If I take I could learn a new specialization. So that means I could learn diplomacy, embellishments, flattery, romance, and truth. Now, the thing about having a specialization is, let's say that I have flattery as my specialization. So I would write underneath persuasion, I would write flattery, and let's say that I had a D6 under persuasion. So now whenever I use flattery as a skill, I'm rolling a D20. In addition to my D20, I'm going to be rolling a D6, which is where my persuasion would be, hypothetically. I would also roll all the dice that are underneath that. So in this case, a D4 and a D2. And that would make up my skill check right there if I'm using flattery. So it's really good to specialize in some things. You have to have at least one rank in a skill in order to specialize in it. And you can have like up to 3 specializations or something like that. No, that's not right. I feel like that's not right. But there are 3 listed here under each of the skills. So that's all the things that you can actually do when you gain a skill. And later on, it does tell you like how to make a skill check and shifting dice and stuff like that. So that's neither here nor there. We'll do that in the review. We do need to determine what extra skills we do get, because anytime one of our essence scores increase, including those at the very beginning of character creation, we gain a skill level to be used in the category of skill from that essence ability score. So we got 1 essence to strength. And you know what? I'm actually probably going to just use that to opt into brawn. Or no, not brawn, conditioning. So that actually gives us plus 1 HP. So now we have 3 HP. Yay! Look at that. Our starting health is getting bigger and bigger. We got plus 2 to speed, so that means we get 2 points to add to our skills. I'm definitely going to bump up targeting. Now let me take a look at targeting, because we might also want to specialize. I would like to, for sure, get a rank in targeting, and I think we're also going to specialize in power weaponry. Yeah, power weapon. That way we add a D4 and a D2 to our roll whenever we make a ranged attack with our power weapon. So those are our 2 points in speed, and we get 1 social. Man, we actually have like all of the social skills unlocked. Animal handling, deception, performance, persuasion, and streetwise. You know, he's an odd guy. So let's make him really awkward to be around. We're going to do some performance. And actually, what is underneath performance? Let's see. We have visual arts, literary arts, so that could be poetry, but I think I wouldn't necessarily do that at the very beginning, because we'd only have that D2. I would probably do it after like a couple points in, like as a D4. So maybe next time we get a bump in social, we'll add or actually like poetry reading or something like that. And so that is all that we would do for our skills. So you would actually need to remember that some of your skills did get an increase, and the number that it increases by is how many points you get to spend at the very end, because our skills were already determined by our role and our origin. So some of our skills were already set by that. But you do get bonus ones depending on the types of increases that you got throughout the character creation process. So with that out of the way, let's move on to the next step. So the next step in our character creation process would be to describe your character. And honestly, I would have just lumped that up in step number 1. Like, we already know that we're at level 1. I should probably write his name. His name is Antonio. Not so good with last names. Pronouns are he and him. And our description, we're just going to put Latino. And that's really all there is for that specific type of description. Of course, he is going to have some sort of pink embellishments in the things that he wears, or maybe the jewelry that he decides to wear, maybe like an earring or something like that. Because, that's always a thing in Power Rangers. They always wear their colors when they're in normal attire. And that's really all there is for describing your character. So again, I would have just done that in step 1 when we actually came up with the general information about our character. So we're actually going to talk about selecting equipment right here. Our gear is actually determined by our role, and we already actually have that. So remember, we have 4 pieces of equipment. We have our wrist communicator, our power morpher, our blade blaster, and our ranged weapon, which is probably going to be like some sort of a sniper. But this is actually the part where I would tell you to work with your GM, because you might not be doing a standard Ranger, thing. You might not be doing Mighty Morphin Power Rangers or Zeo Rangers. You might be doing their made up creation, and there might be a theme that goes with it. For example, Samurai Rangers, the theme was obviously samurai. And so there might be a theme that goes with their universe, their made up universe. So you might want to consult with your GM to see like what kind of weapons that you can create that kind of fit that theme and stuff like that. For now, I'm just going to write the standard equipment that we got, and then we'll worry about that later in case we actually ever do play this and stuff like that. So really, we're done with all of character creation. We've gotten our skills and our equipment, our role, influence, our origin. All of that's been set. Yeah, after you're done with your skills, you're kind of already set if you've been writing everything down. The only thing I would say that you might need to look out for is things like your attacks, what kind of attacks are you using, and maybe take a look at the equipment chapter to see, what kinds of equipment that you can use, because let me tell you, there's a lot of stuff you can use. And they do cover quite a large array or large area in the Power Ranger universe. So this goes all the way across, by the way. So not as much as you might think. But things like the Blade Blaster, which has Energy 1, uses one hand. So I'm going to assume that Energy 1, Sharp 1 are things like damage. I'm not quite sure. Still haven't quite got through to that. I think I'm on the Zord chapter, yeah. So I haven't quite figured out anything about combat just yet. Although I do know that your defenses help out with combat quite a bit, like toughness and evasion and stuff like that. So the equipment chapter is a very good read through. There's lots of stuff and lots of upgrades for your equipments too. By the way, yeah, combined weapons, that's also a thing here. So cool. So other than that, I would definitely look into like what your attacks are and stuff like that. Your armor, ours is going to be light for obvious reasons. Pink is only trained in light, and we'd have our weapons, which we'll have to pick one from that list of equipment and kind of write in. But other than that, we're actually done with character creation. So thank you guys so much for watching. Feel free to leave a comment down below. Give this video a huge thumbs up to support the series. And don't forget to check the description where you can find Antonio the Pink Ranger, the world's first pink Latino Ranger, in the description already made in case you would like to use him for your game. And I will see you guys in the next video.